like to invite you to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29. Jeremiah, chapter 29. And if you will meet me at verse number 1, if you will read this passage, hear these words, listen to this message, not from Conley Gibbs Jr., but from the God of our salvation, who just uses me as a mouthpiece to utter his word to his people. I believe you will certainly be blessed in studying, reading, learning from Jeremiah chapter 29, and again beginning with verse 1. The Bible says, "Now these are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem unto the residue of the elders, which were carried away captives, and to the priests, and to the prophets, and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried away captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. After that, Jeconiah the king, and the queen, and the eunuchs, the princesses of Judah and Jerusalem, and the carpenters and the smiths were departed from Jerusalem, by the hand of Elasah the son of Shaphan, and Gemariah the son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah king of Judah sent unto Babylon to Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon. Build you houses, and dwell in them, and plant gardens, and eat the fruit of them. Take you wives, and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, that you may be increased there, and not diminished. And seek the peace of the city whither I have caused you to be carried away captives, and pray unto the Lord for it. For in the peace thereof shall you have peace. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Let not your prophets and your diviners that be in the midst of you deceive you, neither hearken to your dreams which you cause to be dreamed. For they prophesy falsely unto you in my name. I have not sent them, saith the Lord. For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word toward you, in causing you to return to this place. Again, this was Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 1 through 10. On this day, the message perhaps will be fitting and appropriate to each and every one of us in one way or another. It may meet you at your current place. It may remind you of a past time in your life, or it may be relevant at some future point. And that topic for today, I am not where I want to be, and it is frustrating me. I am not where I want to be, and it is frustrating me. If you're not where you want to be, if you find yourselves frustrated, certainly there is a blessing from Jeremiah chapter 29. As we uncover the truths of this chapter, there are some principles that we can glean from this chapter that can help us if we're not where we want to be, and if we find ourselves frustrated about our life circumstances. This, the 29th chapter of the book of Jeremiah, is the result of God's people in the southern kingdom, Judah. They were taken captive by their enemies, the Babylonians. Not only were they oppressed by their captors, but they were exiled or removed from their homeland and placed in Babylon and forced to stay there. As we consider verse number 10, the Bible lets us know that this captivity was not permanent, but it was not going to be quick either. For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you. So God's people found themselves in a prolonged, agonizing, and frustrating situation. You and I can relate because sometimes the circumstances of life we know are not permanent, but the agonizing and frustrating experiences can cause us to be depleted in our energy. And as we recognize the difficulties before us, we need some sense of hope, something that would instill courage in us to make it through the long night of our undesired reality. God's people, Judah, having been taken captive, now in Babylonian exile, found themselves discouraged. They were depressed. And you know that if you experience discouragement and depression for a prolonged period of time, it could easily give way to despair. That sense of giving up and waving the white flag of surrender, saying, what is the use? We see this despair in them having sang this song in Psalms 137 that was read a part of our devotional. This is a correlation to what we see in Jeremiah chapter 29. In Psalms, the 137th division, we hear their cry, we feel their pain, we can understand their hurt. It says, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof, for there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. And they responded, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? They didn't feel like singing and playing music because of their discouraging, depressing, and nearly despairing reality. They hung up their hearts on the willows. They could not understand, how can we sing in the midst of captivity? How do we deal with life's problems in the reality that we find ourselves in? We ain't in no singing mood. Certainly we understand what it's like not to be jovial. Every moment of your life is not always a happy moment. I can relate and understand because in my own life I've had to deal with periods of discouragement. Remembering a few years ago when the song Happy was out, and every time I heard it on the radio, I had to turn it. I couldn't stand the song. I just despised hearing it because in that period of life, I didn't feel very happy. I felt burdened and overwhelmed with life circumstances, and I certainly didn't want to hear a song about being happy. And so I can understand, and you can understand, this reality of Judah when they hang their harps on the willows and they say, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Need you to understand that Judah was in a geographical place that was different than Jerusalem. They had been taken from Jerusalem and put into Babylon, but they were not only in a bad place geographically, they were in a bad place emotionally, and worse yet, they were in a bad place spiritually. When you're in a bad place, you ain't in no smiling, tickle me, feel good kind of mood. What those in Judah had to come to grips with is that the consequences of their choices found them in this captivity. They had misaligned priorities. They were spiritually bankrupt. And this is important to understand about Judah, to recognize that it's not that God ignored his people and the enemy got the best of them. God allowed this captivity to happen because of their choices, because of their priorities, because of their spirituality. This needs to be understood. This needs to be appreciated. Because so often in our lives, we make it our business to find someone else to blame. We don't have to bear responsibility. We don't have to deal with the guilt, with the shame, with the embarrassment. We do not have to do anything when we can say, I'm unhappy because of someone else. I'm burdened because of someone else. I'm plagued with problems because of someone else. And as long as we play the someone else's card, we never own the responsibility that we have in our life circumstances. Now, I'm not suggesting that every time you have a problem, every time you have a burden, every time you have a heartache, that it's your fault. I'm not suggesting that the devil is not busy and that enemies don't try to get the best of you. I certainly understand that. I appreciate that. I respect that. And I believe that. But there are some times in our lives where what we are dealing with is not simply the result of the devil or enemies, but we need to own the fact that we are subject to the consequences of our own choices. We need to own our lives. We need to admit our mistakes. We need to own our responsibility for what we've done or did not do that may have caused some of the outcomes that we don't like. You cannot begin to fix life's problems trying to figure out why everybody else need to do something and you don't take no ownership. Now, Judah needed to understand that their present distress at the time was not going to be a permanent problem. Again, in verse number 10, God says, after 70 years be accomplished. And we need to understand that what we're going through in our lives is not permanent. But God, in his divine providence, allows what he allows for a period of time and a purpose, and he does not have to consult us and get our permission to determine how long and what we're going to deal with. There are some things in this passage that can help you if you're not where you want to be and you find yourself saying, it's frustrating me. First thing we need to consider from the passage is we need to think about when we are not where we want to be. What are the voices, or who are the voices we listen to? The voices that you listen to can make the difference in you being where you shouldn't be, and certainly where you don't want to be, or you getting out of what you got into in the first place. Let me help us understand. In Jeremiah chapter 11, for example, God has sent his prophet Jeremiah to prophetically give a message to Judah. God's wrath is coming. God wants you to change your ways. God is not pleased. In Jeremiah chapter 11, the people don't hear the voice of Jeremiah. As a matter of fact, in verse number 21, the Bible says, the men of Anathoth, they sought to take Jeremiah's life. They tell Jeremiah to stop prophesying in the name of the Lord. And if you stop prophesying, we won't kill you. They refused in Judah to hear the voice of Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 14, these people sought to hear the voice that told them what they wanted to hear. You have to be careful about folk that when you ask for advice, they give you the answers you want. They tickle you. They make you feel good. You need to be careful about a preacher that's always got you laughing, always got you feeling good, always got you comfortable. You need to be careful about friends, about people you seek advice from, that if every time they speak, you are never challenged, you are never invited into deeper prayer and deeper consideration and contemplation. They always tell you what you want to hear. And the sad thing is that we feel like people who tell us what we want to hear support us. They got our back. In Jeremiah chapter 14, these people did not want to hear what Jeremiah had to say. He was trying to lead them to a spiritual conclusion that would be healthy and that would allow them to be happy, but they didn't want to hear what Jeremiah had to say. Starting in verse 17, therefore thou shalt say this word unto them, I tell you what, let's even do this. Let's go back in Jeremiah 14. Let's go back to verse number 12. I want you to get the whole context here. I want you to see this. In Jeremiah 14 and verse 12, when they fast, I will not hear their cry, and when they offer burnt offering and an oblation, I will not accept them, but I will consume them by the sword and by the famine and by the pestilence. Now, I need you to understand that in Jeremiah 14 and verse 12, this is not Jeremiah speaking. This is God speaking. This is God telling Jeremiah that I am going to punish my people. I am going to exact revenge and my wrath on my people. Here's what Jeremiah says to God in response. Then said I, verse 13, Ah, Lord God, behold, the prophets say unto them, you shall not see the sword, neither shall you have famine, but I will give you assured peace in this place. Notice that God is saying he's upset with his people. He sends Jeremiah to prophesy that he's upset. And the people said, we hear prophets who tell us that this is not going to happen. Now, these prophets act like they smarter than God. God is saying, I'm going to bring you sword and famine and pestilence. And the prophets are saying, no, that's not going to happen. In verse 13, he says, these prophets are telling the folk this is not going to happen. Verse 14, the Lord said unto me, the prophets prophesy lies in my name. I sent them not, neither have I commanded them, neither spake unto them. They prophesy unto you a false vision and divination, and a thing of naught, and the deceit of their heart. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God concerning the prophets that prophesy in my name, and I sent them not. Yet they say, sword and famine shall not be in this land. By sword and famine shall those prophets be consumed. And the people to whom they prophesy shall be cast into the streets of Jerusalem because of the famine and the sword, and they shall have none to bury them, their wives, nor their sons, nor their daughters, for I will pour their wickedness upon them. Therefore thou shalt say this word unto them, let mine eyes run down with tears night and day, and let them not cease. For the virgin daughter of my people is broken with a great breach, with a very grievous blow. Understand, I want to make sure that everyone is clear. God is upset with the sins of his people. He sends Jeremiah to tell them just that. They not only dislike what Jeremiah says, they say, if you don't shut up saying what you say, we gonna kill you. And in the process of wanting to kill Jeremiah, they are saying there are some other prophets who have prophesied, and they have told us everything is going to be okay. Beloved, it's important to understand this principle, because when we're listening to the wrong voice, we get the wrong encouragement. When we listen to the wrong voice, we make the wrong choices. When we listen to the wrong voice, we might hear what we want to hear, but we're not going to get what we want to get. We have to be careful that we don't allow what I want to hear to be so loud that we miss what we need to hear. So often people come for what they call counseling, seeking advice, seeking guidance, and they're not really seeking counseling. They don't really want advice or guidance. They're looking for you to amen what they've already formulated in their head. They're looking for you to affirm what they foolishly believe. And when you are honest with them, they feel as if you don't support them or you don't believe in them. And when someone tells them what they want to hear, they think they are the greatest people in the world. I remember once having a member some years ago who asked me something about moving, and I say to people all the time that I could never tell someone not to move because I've moved in my life, and sometimes opportunities present themselves, and you're able to grow and move up the ladder in the corporate realm or whatever aspect of life you're working in. But always remember that you take you with you. Always remember that wherever you go, you still take you. And I had a member fell out with me about that and stopped coming to church and just felt that I was, just this inconsiderate preacher to make that statement. And so this particular person moved, didn't last a year. Where they went, came back and recognized the very thing I said. You take you wherever you go. So you have to be careful that when somebody who has your best interests at heart, someone who loves you, someone who's trying to do what is best for you, is guiding you, that you don't fall out with people who are trying to help you and accept the counsel of folk who don't have your best interests at heart. This happens so often in our lives because we have a tendency to search out people that are going to validate our foolishness. But here's the question that we have to ask ourselves. When I accept advice from someone, do they love me? Do they have my best interests at heart? But more important, if this advice backfires, are they willing to pay the price with me? See, people can easily tell you what you want to hear, but if it blows up, who's got to pay the price? So we have to be careful that we don't make the mistake of Judah. And here's how foolish Judah is. When you get back to chapter 29, I've already illustrated that they got into the problem because they were listening to the wrong voices. Now they are in Babylon. They have been taken captive, and they still have folk among them telling them the same kind of foolishness that got them in the circumstance they're in. Notice in Jeremiah chapter 29 at verse number 8. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, let not your prophets and your diviners that be in the midst of you. Notice this, the prophets and the diviners that be in the midst of you deceive you, neither hearken to your dreams which you caused to be dreamed, for they prophesy falsely unto you in my name. I have not sent them, saith the Lord. Now go back to what we discussed in chapter 11 and chapter 14. They listen to the wrong voices. When we get to chapter 29, they are in captivity because they listen to the wrong voices. Now they are in a mess. They are in a predicament. Judah is not where they want to be. They are frustrated. They're discouraged. They're depressed. They stop singing and playing music. They say, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And what are they subject to again, according to verse 8 and 9? They are subject to the same foolish voices that got them in the mess they're in. And these foolish voices are again lying to them. They lied to them and they bought into the lie and got in the mess. Now they in the mess, and the same lying people are dealing with them in such a way to give them a false hope about the mess they're in. You gotta be careful about folk that want to counsel you and advise you. You might need to look at their lives and see, where are you spiritually? You're going to give me some spiritual advice. Where are you spiritually? You trying to help me in my life. I need to look at your life to see what kind of outcomes you got in your life. Notice these people are in the same predicament they're in. Again, in the verse 8, it says, these people are in the midst of you. They just as messed up as the rest, and yet they want to give everybody else some advice. How many of y'all have met folk like that? They money jacked up. They want to tell you how to handle your money. They marriage is jacked up. They want to tell you how to handle your marriage. They kids jacked up. They want to tell you how to handle your kids. They jacked up on their job. They ain't doing what they supposed to be doing. They've been on the job 30 years and they ain't got a promotion, and they gonna tell you how to be an employee on your job. You gotta be careful that you don't look at people who are in the same mess. Now, you might be able to learn from their mess what not to do, but you have to be careful about people who find themselves, like in verse 8, in the middle of the same mess you in, but they got all kind of counsel and advice to help you get out the mess. You know why we listen to those people? Because we buy into this foolish thinking. I want somebody to understand. I want somebody that can relate to me. And so we consult people who just as messed up as we are, because if you're messed up, I don't have to feel bad about being messed up. If you're messed up, then I feel like it's not just me. But I can't talk to somebody who's outshining me, because then I have to face my own insecurities. See, if I look at somebody who's doing better than me, who's shining better than me, who is walking a step ahead of me, then I have to come to grips with the idea that I'm not all that I thought I was. I have to come to grips with the idea that I didn't make choices as good as they made. I have to come to grips with the fact that my life is messed up, and even though I'm in a mess right now, somebody is actually doing better than me. Somebody's prospering more. Somebody is happier. Somebody's got a better glow than me. Somebody is experiencing more joy than me. And I don't want to deal with that. And so I like to associate with people, as we say, Rebecca Gibbs, I don't want to talk to so-and-so. I want to talk to somebody who understands what I'm going through. The folk who understand what you're going through are either the people in the midst of it or the people who've already come out of it. You need to get with the folk who've come out of it, the folk who are shining, who are progressing, who are doing well, and be courageous enough and secure enough to listen to the right voices. Not only must we be careful about the voices we listen to, we must be careful about our viewpoint when we're not where we want to be and it's frustrating me. In verses 5 through 7, God basically tells them, and I'm going to use a modern day vernacular, live the American dream. Buy your house, get married, have kids, plant you some gardens, put some tulips, some lilacs out in the yard, landscape your yard, mow your lawn, edge your lawn, wash your windows, power wash the lime and algae off your house. In verses 5 through 7, God tells them, and again, I'm just using a modern analogy to make it make sense, live the American dream. Verses 5 through 7 seem to conflict with verse number 10. Because in verse 10, God acknowledges that they are in captivity in Babylon. So if they are in captivity in Babylon, and then he says you're going to be there for a period of 70 years, how do you make sense out of verses 5 through 7 where he says, live the American dream? That's a baffling mystery. Well, here's how we have to understand this. God is saying to them, you're not where you want to be, and you're frustrated. Here's some things you have to understand about life. Number one, you have to accept the consequences of your choices. That's number one. Number two, life is never idealistic. Sometimes we never appreciate what we have because we always think of what more we want. As an example, you can say, Brother Gibbs, my life would be awesome if I got $1 million. You know what would happen when you get $1 million? You would be complaining you ain't got $2 million. Brother Gibbs, my life would be awesome if I could just get the job of my dreams. Know what happens when you get the job, your dreams, then you start praying in church and asking folk to pray because them folk at your job getting on your nerves. Right, Gibbs? My life would be awesome if I could just get married. Then you get married, and 6 months later, your prayer request is, we going through some things, and you never know a person, and things just ain't what I thought they were going to be. Right, Gibbs? My life would be awesome if I would just have some kids who could just love me for me. Then you start complaining, my kids are getting on my last nerves. My life would be awesome if I could get out of marriage and just be by myself. Then your complaint is, I'm lonely. My life would be awesome if I just went to a church that this, or if I just had that, and what you find is that until you learn to be happy with you, you'll never be happy where you are in life. I don't care where you go, who you meet, what you do, and what you accomplish. Until you learn to be okay with you, you will never find happiness in people, places, or things. So God is saying to them, accept the consequences of your choices. He's saying to them, I want you to have this viewpoint to accept that life is less than idealistic. And he's saying to them, I want you to thrive in order to survive. You are in captivity. You have been taken from Jerusalem. You are in Babylonian exile. And God says, build a house. God says, plant a garden. God says, eat fruit. God says, get married, have sons, have daughters, find wives for your sons, give your daughters to husbands. God says, I know you are in captivity, but in the midst of where you are, I want you to thrive in order to survive. See, sometimes we have to learn that when we experience the less than idealistic realities of life, we've got to get out of utopia. We cannot wait for the perfect world. We cannot aspire to things being the way they should be. We have to learn how to deal with what is as opposed to what should be. Many people find themselves frustrated because their life, they approach it from the way things should be. God is saying, I want you to approach life from the way it is. Life is unfair. Life is hard. Life is stressful. Life is frustrating. Life has tears. Life produces pain. Life has heartaches. Life has upsets. Life has disappointments. Life has defeats. Life has setbacks. Life has failures. Life has falls. Life has issues that we do not desire. Life produces circumstances that are not kind. Life is not what we want it to be, but God says, I want you to stay there in the midst of 70 years of captivity, build you a house, plant you a garden, eat the fruit, get married, have a family, watch your family grow, not because it's idealistic, not because it's what you want it to be, but in order to experience life, you've got to accept that life is not perfect. You have to learn to make the best of what life has given to you. I know we've got some card-playing people on the call. And I love playing the game of spades. Yes, I'm a preacher and I play cards. I love playing spades. I may not be the best player, but I have fun playing. In the game of spades, you can have a partner, somebody that's got a good hand. They can have aces and kings and spades, and y'all still lose the game. Because a part of being good at winning is not getting the perfect hand. and y'all know where I'm going with this, is learning to play the hand that you got. And some people will always be frustrated in life because they're upset they didn't get the hand they want. Well, I didn't get the ace, I didn't get the king, the queen, the jack, I didn't get the spades. And that's the problem with too many folks. They're upset about everything in their life. Well, I wasn't born into a rich family. Well, I was born a minority. Well, I have a handicap. Well, I didn't get the support I thought I was going to get from my family. Well, I got this against me. Some folk are so busy trying to sell you on their problems that they never give time to think of a solution. Let me ask you, in order to have the right viewpoint, we talked about listening to the right voices. We're talking about having the right viewpoint that God wanted them to have. He wanted them to thrive, to survive. Here's some things I want you to understand. First, approach life with a faith view and not a false view. When you get time, read Genesis 13. Many of you are familiar with it, but refresh yourself by reading Genesis 13. You remember Abraham and Lot and how they separated. Abraham said, go whichever way you go, I'll go the other way. Let's not have this division among us. Let's not have these problems. And in Genesis 13, verse 10, the Bible talks about Lot and how he looked at Sodom. And from a human perspective, Sodom looked like it had it going on. Sodom was what we might consider the modern day Sin City, Las Vegas. If everything that you could think of was there, all of the happening stuff, bright lights, activity, fun, entertainment, excitement. But in the midst of what you saw was a lot of sin and corruption. Lot took the false view. What Abraham saw was nothing but trees and mountains. But Abraham got the better outcome because he took a faith view. So I want to encourage you in your life to have the right viewpoint. Don't take the false view. Just because it looks good doesn't mean it is good. Everything that glitters ain't gold. Don't take the false, it makes sense human view. Make sure it makes sense in your faith. Here's the other thing about having the right viewpoint in life. Always approach when you are not where you want to be and it's frustrating you. Have a strategic response and not an emotional or impulsive response. You all remember my favorite book of the Bible is Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 1 and verse 1 and verse 4, and then chapter 2 and verse 1. The Bible talks about word getting to Nehemiah that Jerusalem had been destroyed, that the gates and the walls of the city had been destroyed and burned. They broke down the wall of Jerusalem and burned its gates. Here's what I want you to understand. In Nehemiah chapter 1, the Bible said it was the month of Chislev when he gets this message. And chapter 2 and verse number 1, it is the month of Nisan where he begins to do what God has called him to do. From Chislev to Nisan is a period of about 4 months, 3 to 4 months. Here's why that's important. In life, we have to be careful when we encounter problems that we are not reacting out of emotion and impulse. In between Chislev and Nisan, Nehemiah spends time praying. He spends time strategizing. He spends time preparing himself. When you're not where you want to be and it's frustrating me, Don't allow your emotions and your impulse to get you like Moses in Numbers 20, verses 11 and 12, when Moses struck the rock twice, called God's people rebels, and then he missed out on entering into the promised land. Don't allow yourself to be frustrated and emotional and you miss your blessings because you act from a nonsensible mindset. Have the mindset of a Nehemiah to be strategic. Think through it. Obey Psalms 27, verse 14, where the Bible talks about waiting on the Lord. Sometimes you need to just let God give you the guidance when you admit that you don't have it for yourself. Jesus gives an analogy in Luke chapter 14, and he's in context talking about the cost of discipleship. But in Luke chapter 14, he talks in verses 28 and 29 and 30 and 31, and he's talking about a guy building a tower and how the guy sits down first and counts the cost to see if he has enough to build it. He talks in verse 31 about a king going to war against another king, and he sits down to have time to strategize and to consult to see whether or not he's able to win this battle. There are times in our lives where we make hasty decisions, where we get ourselves in circumstances, and it's like getting in the hole, and the more you kick, the deeper you're making the hole. Sometimes you need to step back, allow your emotions to settle, admit you've made a mistake. Don't worry about people laughing at your mistake, because folk have made mistakes themselves, but allow yourselves to think strategically to say, I'm not where I want to be, but this is not going to keep frustrating me, because God has given me a path to get out of what I find myself in. I just need to hear the right voices. I need to have the right viewpoint. I need to have a faith view and not a false view. I need to think strategically and not emotionally and not impulsively. The Bible gives us example after example about the importance of not being hasty. Proverbs 19 and verse 2, also that the soul be without knowledge, it is not good, and he that hasteth with his feet sinneth. The Bible tells us don't be so quick. And sometimes when we get into things, it's because we were too quick, too hasty, we didn't think through. And then we get in them, and like Judah, we can find ourselves hastily trying to get out of it. And God is saying, you're going to have to deal with your consequences for 70 years. While you there, go on and build your house, find love, get married, let your kids get married. God is saying you have to learn how to thrive when things are not the way you want them to be. You have to have an attitude to make the most of a circumstance. And then last, not only must we listen to the right voices, not only must we have the right viewpoint, but quickly, I want you to understand that when you're not where you want to be and it's frustrating you, you still have to be virtuous. In verse number 7, now notice this, in verse 7 of Jeremiah 29, and seek the peace of the city whither I have caused you to be carried away captives. That's a whole lot of preaching there, and time just won't allow me to say everything that can be said. I want you to notice, first of all, they're in captivity, and God said, seek peace from your captors. Isn't that interesting? They're in captivity, and God says, and seek the peace. Why? He is saying, never allow where you are to change you or to corrupt you. Always maintain a virtuous mind, a virtuous character, a virtuous personality. As a matter of fact, let it help you to become a better person. People who are strong in character, people who have the ability to think wisely, these are not people who were born that way. These are people who've been through something and they learned something to help them to develop the strength, the character, the virtues that we admire. The folk that are not virtuous are the people who complain about everything and everybody. It's always something that has nothing to do with them. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always a reason somebody else should be blamed. It's always a circumstance they didn't ask for. And those are people who go through life as victims. And victims never find happiness because they love being the victim and they love the sympathy that comes from being, woe is me. God says, seek the peace in that city. But then remember, God, according to this, verse 7, God says, I caused you to be carried away. Sometimes we're blaming the devil, and God is saying, it's me that put you in this predicament. It's me that put you in the furnace of affliction. The Bible talks about the fact that God will put us in the furnace of affliction. Why? Because he's trying to get out of us the impurities and to help us to shine. Beloved, I mentioned at the top of the message, my goal in preaching is either to help you to get to heaven or to help you to deal with life until we get there. It might be this pandemic. It may be problems in your life that ain't got nothing to do with the pandemic. Perhaps the pandemic just magnifies what you're dealing with. Whatever the case, sometimes we find ourselves like Judah. We are not where we want to be, and it frustrates us. I want to encourage you to listen to the right voices. Don't listen to voices who helped you get into the mess. Don't listen to voices who in just as much of a mess as you're in. Listen to the voices that you know speak in behalf of God. Voices that are consistent with not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. Have the right viewpoint. Face life from a faith view and not a false view like Lot. Always respond strategically, even if you have to wait like Nehemiah 3-4 months, as opposed to being like Moses and being emotional and impulsive in a momentary reaction that caused him to miss what he had worked for 40 years in the wilderness. And finally, always be virtuous, no matter how frustrated you are when you're not where you want to be. And again, being somewhere you don't want to be may not just be geographically. It can be where you are emotionally or where you are spiritually. But don't let your character be compromised. Come out of what you're in a stronger person and a better person so that you don't have to go through it again. And perhaps God can use you to help somebody else. I hope that this blesses you. I hope this meets you where you are. I hope that in the days ahead that somebody can say that this message met them. They were where they shouldn't have been. They were frustrated, but by the grace of God and the principles applied to Judah, applying that to your life can bless you. May God bless you as we call on Brother Gerald Brown to give us our song and to hope and pray that the hearts of God's people have been stirred so that if you're not where you want to be and you're frustrated, you can get to where God wants you to be. May God bless you.